Here's a special important message.
All right, hello, welcome to another episode of We Are the Road Crew. This is episode number 4. My name is Stephen Hill. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast thus far. I think it's been pretty good, if I don't say so myself. This is, as I remind you every week, as we open, a podcast where I interview somebody who has lived a life of live music, somebody who has worked within the realms of live music, usually behind the scenes, usually doing something to do with actually putting the gig on, whether it be a tour manager, a guitar tech, a roadie, somebody who works on the pyrotechnics, somebody who works in some sort of stage management capacity. This week it is slightly different, because usually I would say, hey, you, the guy who stands next to the amp tuning guitars, have you ever wanted to be up on that stage before? Well, this week we have a man called Andy Corrigan, who is currently the founder of a business called Viva La Visa, which is a company that makes visas for bands. But Andy actually has a past fronting the legendary UK punk band the Mekons, something he does still to this very day. He did that up until kind of the early 80s, which meant he saw the kind of the explosion of punk in 1977 and beyond, and he kind of lived through that whole punk scene. So we'll be talking to him very much about that, and of course how he transitioned into becoming a tour manager, managing the likes of everyone from New Order and Public Image Ltd to the Human League. I'm going to ask him about the Human League and the kind of the way that punk rock turned into new wave in the 80s and then beyond, and all the kind of things that he's done tour managing bands over the years in a very, very long career since the early 80s. So yes, I'm very much looking forward to this, because, as you know, this is a bit of me, punk rock. Love it. And I love a little bit of 80s new romantic as well. I don't mind admitting it to you. As I said, hope you've enjoyed the podcast so far. If you have, feel free to leave us some sort of review on wherever you listen to your podcast, if it's an iTunes, and give us the old 5-star click and just a little thumbs up, maybe a little message saying how great this has been. You know, I'm not going to type out the whole thing for you. You do it yourself. And follow us at Road Crew Pod on Twitter, and you can find us on Facebook as well. But for now, sit back and enjoy my conversation as I talk to a man who has seen many a punk legend up close and in the flesh. It's Mr. Andy Corrigan. Andy, thank you very much for joining us. We much appreciate that. How are you doing? You good?
A pleasure. I'm good. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good,
yeah,
good.
I'm good.
You're a man who we'll talk about kind of the 80s and post-punk and that whole scene right. in a little bit. But just before we started recording, you wanted me to tell you about Morrissey, because we were just chatting about you going to see Morrissey at the Palladium back in... You got a year?
It was while the riots were going on in London, right? That very night, and there's a riot going on stage with Morrissey and his security man and some of the audience.
Really?
Yeah, it's good. He tries. Morrissey, as everyone probably knows, is a kind of confrontational chap, and he incites the audience to come and have a go a bit and play at the Palladium. There's no barrier. And his security man was standing on the side of the stage looking a bit nervous, and the house security people were there, and there was a bit of a dust-up between them, and the audience got on the stage, and yeah, it was quite good, really. I enjoyed it. And going on outside was people burning and looting in... a throwback to the kind of days that we'll probably be talking about. Yeah, it was good. It was good. It was very,
Morrissey's just been kind of in the news recently for selling signed records at his show in LA. He did the Hollywood Bowl in LA,
right?
And for $300 he was selling signed albums. $300 seems like quite a lot.
His own albums?
Yes. And also albums by Lou Reed, David Bowie and Iggy Pop, signed by him.
Oh, okay.
Well, did you buy that?
No, I wouldn't. Well, I wouldn't buy anything from Morrissey. But no, I can't see that there's any connection there, or why anyone would want to buy.
It's an odd thing to have Aladdin Sane signed by Morrissey, isn't it? But you know,
maybe he's short of a few quid. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I didn't think he would be. But anyway, that's obviously a bit of an aside. But let's go back to kind of something the pre-Morrissey world, if you like.
Does such a thing exist? Yeah.
Well, it's what would we call it? BM. The BM era, the before Morrissey era. Back in the day, you were a man who got to see some of the kind of the most legendary I guess one of the most exciting explosions of sound and colour and noise that the world has ever seen. The kind of the UK punk scene and the kind of genesis of that. You were a man who was kind of right in amongst that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Right.
But
okay.
it didn't feel like at the time. But yes,
Yeah,
I was.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
but yeah, it did actually. It did feel like something had changed. It's like waiting for something to happen for 3 years or 4 years before it happened, and then it did.
So your relationship with music, and particularly live music. Can you remember the first kind of album you got into? We always ask this every week. The first, and really, the first time you experienced seeing a band on stage and what that was like for you.
First album I bought, I can remember, because I didn't have a record player when I was little. No, it wasn't one in our house. Was The Rock Machine Turns You On, the CBS sampler in 1968. I think.
Wow.
13 and 11.
Yeah.
With hard saved up pocket money. It had people like Spirit and Bob Dylan on it, and that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember the first gig I went to, because you do. It was Taste, supported by Stone the Crows at Liverpool Philharmonic Hall in 1972, 71.
Right.
Can't remember exactly.
Okay.
And I thought it was great.
I'm just going to fess up right now. I am not familiar with either of those acts.
Rory Gallagher.
Okay.
Rory
cool.
Gallagher's band was called Taste before it was just called Rory Gallagher Band, and it was
Right.
the same. It was a three-piece rock band, and he had the same check shirt and very battered Stratocaster and Vox AC30.
It's not a bad opening gig.
It was good. It was
Right.
great, and Stone the Crows were a bluesy rock Scottish band with a woman singer called Maggie Bell, who's great, and Les Harvey, who's Alex Harvey, as in Sensational,
Yes.
younger brother, who sadly got electrocuted on stage and died.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, great guitar player. They were
know
good.
that.
They were a good band.
Okay.
Yeah, he was very, very sadly. He was, in the days when health and safety was not quite so prominent. He got electrocuted and died on stage at 72 or something like that, 73, 74, sometime like that.
Right, okay. You said, obviously I remember my first gig. What kind of impact did that have on your life?
Completely. No, God, it's all I want. When I came, growing up, I had no idea that it was possible to make a living out of music in any shape or form, or for me. And I love music. Had a little diversion from not loving music about the age of 11, 12, and then got back into, sort of 13, and listened to John Peel on the wireless,
of course.
and that because there was no places to listen to music, really, and saved up my little bits of pocket money and bought records, and went to gigs when I could, although I lived in the country outside Liverpool. I never dreamt that I would make a living out of music until I went to, much later, was away at university, and the days of punk. So it's punk that made it possible. And I was just a fan, and I just loved it. And it was a great source of conflict between me and my mother.
Right.
As I'm sure is the case for lots of
Yeah.
young music fans. I was brought up as a Jehovah's Witness.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
I'm not going to try and convert you now
No,
or anything like that.
Good luck with that.
But yeah, I was. So I used to go and knock on people's doors, and I hated it. And as I became a teenager, I kind of realised that it was a load of old nonsense, and I didn't believe any of it. And my mother thought that one of the roots of my disbelief was my liking for this terrible music.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of became pretty important to me.
So a kind of a genuine fork in the road path to a completely different lifestyle to the one that you had been marched down. You would say music
completely.
was the salvation, was the thing that took you completely away from that. That's amazing. Let's again kind of pre the punk years and that whole explosion. You said, the idea of making a career out of music just didn't really seem like something that was possible to you. Can you kind of recall the shift when you started noticing bands, I guess, that were, the kind of, I guess the cliche and the thing that people mostly say regarding the punk movement in this country was that, you'd look at bands like Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd, who were these kind of technically masterful superheroes and playing on stages, 300 miles away from where you were standing, and there needed to be something to kind of strip prog rock and the kind of the excess of rock and roll away, and along came punk, and it just became a thing that everyone felt like they could get involved in. How true is that cliche, would you say?
It's true, but it's true in hindsight, because I think if you're going to dig down and be historical about it, there were lots of precursors to punk. There was Dr. Feelgood, and there was that pub rock thing, and I kind of didn't really follow it that much. I just remember having a vague feeling that the records I bought, new records, weren't quite as good as the ones that I'd bought before. I was going buying things like Steely Dan and thinking, this is all right, but it's not really. Yeah. And going to see bands, by that time I was a student at Leeds. I was at Liverpool first, then at Leeds. And I used to go and see bands because Leeds is a big band venue. You know, the Who live at Leeds, but it was a bit before my time. And so quite big bands played there, and I can remember seeing people like Leonard Skinner were actually good. Leonard Skinner were good.
Yeah.
When they were all live and all there. Yeah, they were great. And I remember going to see Procol Harum and thinking, God, they're a bit past it, and this is a bit crap. And I went on my own, and I was thinking, standing there listening, and thinking, really, this is not doing it. And the whole punk thing, it was, I don't know, I guess it was reading about it. You read about it in the NME, and you read about the Sex Pistols, and reading about punk and those bands in some ways is better than hearing it. It's because it sounded. I read about this band, the Sex Pistols, and it sounded amazing, absolutely amazing. And then I heard them, because you heard them on John Peel, and I was in London. I was in London the summer of '76. That summer, the very hot summer, and with a friend, and we were living in South Woodford, and he was a messenger in the city, a foot messenger for his job, and he had got a broken leg because he managed to break his leg falling off the pavement when he was drunk, and so he wasn't a very good foot messenger really. He was kind of slow, but I think it was at some distant relative's company, so they gave him a job. And I was working at the London Dungeon, which is, the London Dungeon, the tourist attraction.
We have something. I used to work in the London Dungeon.
Did you really?
We have something in common.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
What, the one in Tooley Street?
Tooley Street, London Dungeon. Yeah, I used to work there for
you were
2 and a bit years, dressing up as a zombie. And,
you were right.
Yeah.
Okay. I was in a grey warehouse coat staff. I wasn't a.
Oh, right.
We didn't have a zombie in those days. We had a monk. We had a monk, and he was kind of the lowest. He was the lowest of the low. The monk.
Oh yeah.
I
was in that every day. It's a great job.
Why aren't you still
everyone.
No.
Not for everyone.
No.
Well, I mean, Anyway, yes. So you're working at the London Dungeon.
Yeah, and we went to see, me and my friend Mark. We went to see all the bands, all the punk bands we could see, and we spent all our wages on going to see bands. We went to see, we didn't see the Pistols then, but we saw most of the others, the Banshees, Heartbreakers, loads of them, Damned. We went to the Vortex down in Wardour Street, not Wardour Street, next to Wardour Street, and the Marquee and all those little venues, and saw loads of punk bands. And then we went back to university in the autumn, and told our mates at university, this is it. And people said, oh yeah, well, I've got a Modern Lovers album. Jonathan, the first Modern Lovers album, which is produced by John Cale, which is very stripped down and bare, and someone had got a Dr. Feelgood album. So the signs were there, and then the Anarchy tour played in Leeds. Where it was one of the few, the Pistols, the Damned, the Clash, and the Heartbreakers, and it's one of the few shows that they actually played. They played Leeds Poly, and we all went, and it was. We thought it was fantastic. And I got my picture. I was interviewed by the Leeds paper, and I had my picture in the paper there as this punk rock fan.
Amazing.
Wore a razor blade earring. Yeah, there it was. And
so
fame, yeah.
That's when you become, you're like, I am a punk now.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Did you feel that?
No, not quite.
Okay.
It was a bit because we were Ponce Art students, which is the kind of, I'm sorry, but that's, and we didn't realise that the Clash were Ponce Art students. The Clash were the real deal, and we didn't, we kind of knew the Sex Pistols were sort of Ponce Art, but they weren't, not really.
Yeah,
and so we kind of, and we used to mess about and do performance art and things,
okay.
And it was an extension there, so we didn't feel like we were real punks, as in. Yeah, we did. Yeah, I guess we did. We, in terms of, because we formed a band, as you do.
Of course, we'll get onto that.
Yeah, so maybe I did feel like, but I never thought it was punks were these people in London around the Sex Pistols, and people obviously we didn't know, and we were kind of something else. We were kind of playing, and there was always that divide, and I think there always is a kind of divide between what you think of yourself and the real, the real deal.
I would say probably for the sort of people that you're talking about, I guess they call them artsy, performance artsy type people. In New York, obviously you had Television and Talking Heads and Suicide and that sort of thing. Did any of that kind of get into your across your radar at all?
Yeah, I mean, a bit later Talking Heads, because obviously we saw them at Leeds, a little bit later. Suicide, certainly, because they were earlier, and they were a kind of, someone had got a Suicide record. Still great now. Yeah. Absolutely fantastic. And that was a kind of touchstone. But it didn't sort of come together as seeming as part or bits of the same thing, which historically, you realise that it was part of the same kind of, malaise and fed upness with the state of music. Yeah. But there were odd bits and pieces. But it was hard to find, it's hard to find music, hard to find records. So these things we kind of latched onto.
Well, that's the beauty of it, isn't it? I guess, having spent a summer in London, and it particularly being that particular summer as the bubble is swelling for this movement, this type of music, to go back, it's not like you can get your phone out and go, look what I recorded on my phone, or let's go on YouTube and have a look at this band that I saw in London. You are bringing this, bringing back stories, this mythology, like you say, of, reading about punk. Obviously it was a long time afterwards that I started to discover a lot of these acts, but, in the 90s when I started getting into music, trying to find a Misfits record, or trying to find a Black Flag record, or trying to find any of those it was difficult for me to do it. And you just would see you'd read about Swans are the most insane band you'll ever hear, and you're like, I have to hear this, I have to hear it, but it's quite difficult to hear it. So bringing that kind of information back to Leeds and saying to people like, I think something's happening here. What kind of effect did that have on the sort of scene around it? Did it make you kind of want to ape and create a sort of community and a scene of like-minded people around you?
Not so organised as that, but there was a scene. There was a sort of art student scene of us doing performance art, and there was a part of one of our mates was Andy Gill with Gang of Four, and they were just starting. Andy and John were starting Gang of Four, and I thought the name as well. And but they were very much in the Dr. Feelgood stripped down R&B, very very simple and very direct. And the first songs they wrote were like that. And so they were getting together, and we recorded them, and it was forming a band for us. I mean, what punk did was opened up the possibility of being in a band, because I am not a musician. Yeah. Absolutely terrible. No, and all throughout my childhood, I'd love to have been able to play the piano or play the guitar, and I tried. I really couldn't. And so it just opened up that the possibility had never occurred. Like even when Gang of Four started, it was we're going to start, because it took a while for them to say, well, we're going to be a band. It took a while. These things take a while, and it never occurred to me, I could be in a band. It was purely because of punk, and it just, you don't have to, Although actually, a lot of the punk bands could play quite well. But it was that possibility that you don't have to play. So, and it was so we did, and we started our band. We using the Gang of Four's instruments when they'd stop rehearsing, because I was always their sound guy, because I'd got a hi-fi and a copy of Wireless World. And I knew nothing, but slightly more than and I always liked the sound and always the technical stuff. So I was the sound. So it's all part of a little community, and we kind of
Great.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Mekons, and how you guys first kind of got together, and the journey that you went on as a band, and then your kind of the split, and then where you went to, and we'll talk about kind of what we're here to talk about, which is where you went next. But I would like to get some kind of context of what that was like of you guys getting together and sort of retreading the steps of where you guys went.
Well, the Mekons, as I said, it was formed. We had a group of people that weren't in the Gang of Four, that we used to do performance art, and we had a little gang, and we said, we should be a group. We picked up and it was the group of four of us at the time. It was like I was going to be the drummer, and Mark was going to be the bass player, I think, and Tom was going to be the guitar player, and our other mate Kevin, part of the gang, although he wasn't there at that moment, we said, he'd better play as well. So, and I think Tom could play the guitar a little bit, and we tried it out like that, and no one wanted to be the singer, and Mark was really bad at being the bass player. I mean, noticeably badder than anyone. And I was not very good at being the drummer, so we swapped around and said, I'll be the singer, and Mark could be a singer as well, and it settled down, and we found another friend, John, who was a friend of a friend, also an art student, who could had a drum kit. And actually could play the drums a bit, but fine, it's good. But having a drum kit, drum kits were like your passport. If you had a drum kit in those days, you were in a band. Even if you had no, you could have no limbs, and you could still be, because they were gold dust.
Yeah.
And, almost the same with the guitar. And so, and then Ros, who was another art student friend, so she'd come and play the bass. And Ros and Tom had piano lessons when they were kids. So they had a bit of an idea. And Kevin had no idea at all, but I bought a guitar from one of those cash converters shops.
Right.
$9.95, this yellow homemade Flying V, sort of a kind of acid crazed interpretation of what a Flying V might look like.
Right.
It was good. It worked. We did some gigs, and they did a gig with Gang of Four and another band called The Worst. I went back to see my mum for a while, and I was absent from university, I went to see my mum, and I went to see Buzzcocks in Liverpool, and at Eric's, and I'd never seen Buzzcocks. I'd seen all the other punk bands, and I thought I really liked the idea of Buzzcocks. I bought the Spiral Scratch record, and I think they're great. And I went to see them, and they lived up to my, expectation. They're fantastic, and they were supported by this group called The Worst, who were a drummer and a guitar player, and they were really, really, really scruffy. And very dirty and scruffy. And the guitar player looked like a sort of Peter Perrett's kind of nightmare. With really, really wrecked on, taken far too, don't do drugs, kids. The guy, he looked like, and he tuned he had his old Hofner guitar, and he tuned it to a chord, and he'd play no one could see this because I'm moving my finger. He'd play chords by moving his finger up and down the fretboard, and they bashed away, and I thought they were great. And so I sort of, drunkenly went up to them after and said, "Come and play. I'm in a band. Come and play with us in Leeds." And they did. They came and played with us in Leeds. And they were really grumpy, actually, but never mind. They were good. So that was our first kind of gig as Mekons, That was before we had a drummer, and Andy Gill from Gang of Four played the drums. Guitarist played the drums for us.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's good. He's a great drummer.
Yeah.
Very, very good drummer. And John King from Gang of Four introduced us as, five lads down from Police College. And Hendon Police College had a very bad reputation at the time as being a very violent right-wing place. So the irony was...
Right, okay.
And we did that. And then afterwards, the Mekons blagged a support at the local punk club, because there was a punk, called the F Club, supporting the Rosillos. Yeah, poppy kind of good, very good, still going. And their roadie guy said, "Oh, I'm starting a record label. Do you want to be on it?" And we go, "Yeah, all right."
Amazing.
Yeah. And he thought, because the Mekons are the worst group he'd ever seen, kind of thing. He wanted to have this on his. And so we traipsed off up to Scotland and recorded a single in a very spooky cottage near the borders. And it was put out on his record label, and it sold a few copies, and it's good. So
that's a sort of suddenly you're a recording artist.
Yeah, and having never, I'd read about stuff and I'd mixed a bit of sound. Yeah, but completely luck. And then a few weeks later, it's out, and I remember being in the pub and people coming in the pub saying, "You're on the radio. John Peel's playing your record."
Wow!
And it was like, bloody hell, it's like fantastic. Yeah.
How was that to feel? Like John? I mean, obviously, John Peel is a man who has a spectacular ear, or had a spectacular ear, and is responsible for bringing people some bands that it's hard to imagine like the career of so many bands without the sort of patronage of John Peel. That must have been quite a moment for you to. It
was unbelievable. Yeah, I think. But when you're that age, you're kind of very blasé. I was like, okay. You're like, "Oh yeah, that's good, isn't it? That's nice.
Yeah.
Do you want another pint?" "Oh yeah." But it was great. It was, it was great. It was fantastic. But I remember feeling, "Oh, this is really." It's like, what, really? He's played that kind of thing, because he used all the records we've ever made. I've always thought, "Oh God, they're terrible." They really are. Really, do you like it? No, you can't like that. Okay. And then we played gigs, and people came to see the gigs, and more people came every time we played a gig, and it was,
So
it was good.
At what point did you, being a frontman, singer, recording artist, person in a band, at what point did it start to change for you, and how did you kind of transition into tour managing bands?
Well, I'd always been, like I said, I would always been the Gang of Four's sound guy, and I was often the Mekons sound guy as well. I'd have to go and set it up because, it's sometimes the people provided weren't good. I can remember doing one gig in Germany where the people we were had to set up the PA system because all the crew there, they'd taken some acid and they weren't very well. So they were the local crew, not our crew. And I had to do the sound. I'd set up the sound and then go on the stage.
Yeah.
So I was kind of used to that. And I used to still do gigs for Gang of Four and do a lot of sound for other bands around Leeds. Mm-hmm. And we used to do a lot of Rock Against Racism gigs because that was a big, it was great. And I used to mix a lot of the sound there. And we had a PA system which we'd designed and built. Because there were no PA systems for hiring or borrowing, and we donated that to Rock Against Racism. So we were kind of, I was in that world, and I always liked it. I kind of like being behind I like both. I like behind the scenes as well. And then we did the Mekons. We did the classic thing, that you don't do. We signed to a major label stupidly and didn't keep our independence. Signed to Virgin and gave them all the money back immediately by recording at the Manor. It's just complete crap against anything. That everything we believed in, we'll do that. Take us out for a Chinese dinner and we'll do anything. It was so crap. Yeah. And so, we did a first album and it was kind of okay. I think it sounds better to me now than it did at the time. I think I hated it at the time. And we were writing. We went off writing stuff and demoing for a second album, and we got dropped by Virgin. So, and the second album was a bit more. We thought it was a bit more experimental, but I mean, probably wasn't really. We got a little synthesizer. It probably is exactly this. Our level of competence had not increased. We were still not very,
So what year would this have been?
This is 1980.
1980.
Yeah. So we got dropped, and I tried to shop this out. So we said, we'll make the demo. We're in this little weird studio in Yorkshire. It was a folk studio, a guy called Bill Leader, who is still around, and he's a folk and a legend in folk music as a collector and curator of traditional music. Probably not your cup of tea, but in that world. And so we had a bit of that influence, sort of. Right. And that came out later on. So after I tried to shop this record around, we shopped it to a local company and they ripped us off royally and didn't give us any money. We got completely shafted on it. Because we didn't, with hindsight, it's really, we'd just put it out ourselves. So I kind of, at that point, nothing was happening. The band virtually split up because as a punk band, there was a period where you couldn't get arrested. Your stock, and it's true of all punk. I think of all punk bands, your stock was very low. The gig offers dried up, and it was like we couldn't. If we'd had a phone, it would have stopped ringing. Yeah. And we could have probably gone around Europe for a bit longer. But the band just virtually split up, and I went off to go and be a tour manager guy, and that was it. And the band split up for a couple of years really, and then. A couple of years later, they sort of got back together again, the rump of the band, and played kind of more folky influenced music, which is not far from punk in a way. And then they started bringing in country music and the kind of Americana stuff. And then a couple of them went and had some success. And a couple of them went to live in America, and then they continued to this day. They made 20-odd albums of Americana kind of stuff.
I was going to say it's quite an interesting career and as a to play sort of your first album that you were involved in and then to play what they're playing now, you would have absolutely no idea it was the same band.
No. I mean, there's a lot of the same. There's still the left-wing politics and still the same.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I guess sonically speaking.
Yeah, sonically, yeah. And they have kind of there's two people from the original band and a couple of people who were around at the time, and there's been lots of people through it. But the rest of the people in the band now are like proper. They're very good music. Like Lou Edmonds is multi-instrumentalist. Probably he's a great player, and Steve Goulding, the drummer, is one of the best drummers around. Yeah, and these people that kind of. But the original Mekons, then I don't know. We got back together again, and then
yes, you were. Was it Mekons 77?
Yeah,
that's
Mekons, right. Which is the original 6-piece lineup, right? Because and we got offered 2 years ago. We got offered to have one of our singles on an advert in America for Honda.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And they said, I don't know how they got in touch with us. And it was they wanted Where Were You for an advert. And we said, I don't know. And we said, we have to have a meeting, because you were left wing. We have to have a meeting about it. So we didn't have a meeting. Anyway, we had a chat. And we said, yeah, okay. And then they said, and they offered us a lot of money. Well, ridiculous. And we were going, yeah, okay. And then we said, John Langford was playing a gig in Manchester with the drummer, Mekons man, with one of his bands. He said, let's have a meeting. We're all in Manchester. It's sort of central. We're going to all get together. And then we said, why don't we just we could play a few songs, couldn't we, if we're all there? And we thought, OK, we'll have a go. We thought we'd play 6 songs. And it was like we got together and we were on stage and we worked out it was, 37 years since we'd all been in the same room.
Wow.
But we never fallen out. We never which is cool because we shared all the songwriting equally between us, the royalties. Yeah. So that's a good lesson, kids.
It is, yeah.
You two did the same with slightly more success. But
Killing Joke. I was listening to an interview with Jazz Coleman from Killing Joke, and he said they've always split their royalties equally, and I think he said that's why communism works. It's
true. And so we and it was just like when we did it. It was just like. Because none of us had really got any better at playing. Because John, that plays the drums in the Mekons, plays the guitar. So his drumming hasn't advanced since 1980.
Right.
He's just a bit kind of more out of breath now.
Yeah.
And the rest of us kind of still have that level of naivety and not very good, really. Mm. And so it was just like we'd walk down, we'd been down the pub during rehearsal and come back again. And it was the same mistakes. And Tom, we had a long soundtrack. We had no rehearsal, long soundtrack. We would listen to the songs and, before. Yeah. We tried to work out what they were. And Tom, the guitar player, was less like he was 40 years ago. He was really late and didn't make the soundtrack. And just ran in, and it's like, okay, nothing's changed.
That's great.
And we said we'd do a record and we did a festival 2 years ago and we do some little tours. And hopefully we're doing another little one in spring. And it's good fun and we have a nice time.
It is good fun.
That's
great. And to rewind slightly, I guess, what would you call it? The death of punk? Punk is when punk died, the kind of the blanket, this is over, punk's out, new wave is in.
Yeah.
How was that obviously, as you said, the band split up and you found it very difficult to get gigs. How do you personally feel about that shift in the music scene at that time?
It seemed to lose, maybe it's me, I felt a bit old. That it passed me. I had a bit lost focus. I can remember we didn't we didn't split up acrimoniously. We drifted apart.
Yeah,
there was kind of nothing to turn up for. I can remember thinking, what should we do? But doing the second record, we'd been a bit more electronic and a bit more, And I can remember talking with Tom and saying, shall we do a project? Shall we do an electronic music, dance music project? And I was going, oh, shall we? And I was kind of too busy on the road. And it probably should have done then, New Order would have been,
Wow.
Before, Trump. Anyway, we did. So feeling not that it had passed us by a bit. And obviously the rest of the band, they found their thing with folk and Americana and it skirted round that kind of. And I was kind of feeling, that it was. I kind of thought, well, it's over, really, and I'm not going to really be involved in making music anymore at all. Really, that's kind of what I thought. That's it. Never going to do it again.
But presumably, you still want to stay within.
Oh yeah. I wanted. I loved the other side of it. I loved mixing sound and doing tour managing. And the first thing I did some little things for Oval Records and people, And then I did Bow Wow Wow. They were managed by Malcolm McLaren, the Pistols manager, and the Gang of Four's first manager, who was a mate of us and there, had got a job at EMI, and one of his first projects was looking after this new Malcolm McLaren project. I guess they gave it to him because he said, he's an old punk guy. We'll give Malcolm. Yeah. And Malcolm had this band with the 14-year-old girl singer and the Ants. The rest of the band was Adam's old band, and he'd sacked Adam. He'd been asked to manage Adam and the Ants. His solution was to sack Adam and get another singer for the Ants. Right. And call them Bow Wow Wow. And they all wore, and it was when Vivienne Westwood as Fashion Empire was really starting to go, and Vivienne and Malcolm were still together, and they were all decked out in their Vivienne Westwood pirate gear. And he'd given Adam the musical blueprint for his success, there was a record called Burundi Black, which was on a French label called on Barclay, I think, and it was Burundi drums. That beat that Adam used.
Yeah.
And there's this particular record, a 12-inch single, which is around, and Malcolm had a copy of that, and it's kind of around. And he thought, that's one bit of the music, and the other bit would be like, Ennio Morricone, spaghetti guitar, twangy guitar playing.
Yeah.
And that's our musical template and a bit of singing. but that's what Bow Wow Wow were. Yeah. And also the kind of this very young, girl singer and who couldn't sing, who supposedly was found in a laundrette. Discovered in a laundrette in West Hampstead, which is kind of true.
Sounds like the sort of thing Malcolm McLaren
Yeah,
would say.
it was a bit like, and Malcolm had told them behave like the Sex Pistols, behave badly. So I was tour managing them, and I hadn't got the slightest notion what to do. I really, I was making it up as I went along, and kind of, they sort of looked up to me because I was, same age as them, but like, you're the tour, you're supposed to know what, and I haven't got a blooming clue. And off we went, and they would cause mayhem wherever they went, and they would wreck dressing rooms, and we wouldn't get paid because they'd wreck the dressing room, and and they'd wreck hotels, and they had a big gang of mates that used to come around with them who were Ants fans, who were quite, not violent in a nasty way, but kind of like to party. And there was trouble all the time. And Annabella was miserable, and her mother was around, and her mother was pretty awful, and we had to have a chaperone for her, and it was quite, it's a bit of a circus really. And so we went round America a few times, and by the sort of second or third time around America, I kind of worked out how to do it. And I remember the band saying to me, he said, "You used to be shit at doing the sound, Andy, but you've learnt now." And that was after some gig in Toronto. I thought, oh, maybe I have. Maybe, I'd ask the house guys every night, "Oh, how'd you do that? How'd you do that?"
And that, after that first experience, that didn't make you
everything else,
fuck this.
No, I just like, oh, this is how it is. Okay. And I hired a crew guy to come and as much sort of protect the public from the band, really, rather than the other way, who was really big, called Jolyon, who was Gang of Four drummers Hugo's brother, who's very talk like that, and he's very kind of chunky, and he's lovely guy. And so we went around on, and he kept them sort of in order, really. Right. Okay. And but it was, it was good. So
it's the sort of, obviously it is going to be the sort of job where you learn on the job and you get in. Because I was going to say, something that I was going to say was, what would be a typical day, but then I guess there is no such thing as a typical day. I'm trying to think. With Bow Wow Wow, well, the touring was different in those days because places in the UK and Europe didn't have house sound systems. Right.
So that's one big difference. So you had to take your own sound system with you everywhere, and lights. And it wasn't until we went to America that venues had their own sound systems, but they never had any good monitors. And I was always the received wisdom that in touring America there was you took your own monitor system with you because the monitors are terrible in all these little, and the sound systems were variable, shall we say.
Right.
Some of them were good and some of them were not good. But there was a kind of circuit for those kind of Brit post-punk bands, because punk, I remember Lester Bangs, the legendary.
Yes.
Lester Bangs really liked the Mekons. When the Mekons got to the original Mekons, we got to America once. We had to play in New York, and Lester came along. He was friends of a friend of ours, and he came along to the gig, and he loved it. But I mean, he was kind of quite medicated, right. But he kind of came and hung out with us, and he wrote sleeve notes for a record and stuff, and he was very good. And he said, in his more lucid moments, he said, punk's going to take a long, long time for the Americans to get. And it's true that when people like it took many years, and he was absolutely right on that. And so the circuit was made, was there for people like the Police, I suppose, because it was their manager, who was Miles Copeland, the brother of Stuart, and Ian Copeland was the booking agent. They kind of worked out this circuit of you knew where to get a van from, and you went all these venues, and the way and that way of doing that kind of cheap, bargain basement touring that people did in America.
Right.
So we kind of did that. Actually, with Bow Wow, we didn't, because after the first one, we had a proper tour bus and everything. So we kind of quite.
Oh.
Yeah, we were kind of, and I didn't realise at the time we were staying in really. I don't know why it happened, because it was. I didn't end up. We stayed in kind of really nice hotels and stuff, like Sunset Marquee in LA, and it's like. I didn't realise at the time, but in hindsight, I think, oh God, we stayed there. Blimey.
Well, it's funny as well, because they're one of the. I mean, I've looked up kind of a few people that you did tour manage around that time, and I'd say Bow Wow Wow, not one of the first names that would spring to my attention when I think about look at the list of people that you've done. So, kind of after that, when you sort of found a rhythm for doing the job, was it then just a case of waiting for someone to come to you, or?
Well, it was. Yeah, it was. I mean, the next thing I went straight from Bow Wow Wow to doing the Human League, and I remember sitting in a bar with Malcolm in New York, and he was saying, Andy, the Human League are the biggest band in the world, because Malcolm was very bitter, because quite rightly so, and he must have laid awake at night a lot thinking of Adam, because Adam became very, very successful, and Bow Wow Wow kind of didn't. They did okay, but Adam just took what Malcolm had told him and did it. with ruthlessly, and better. And I'm having a conversation with Malcolm, sitting in this bar in New York, and he said, Andy, the Human League are the biggest band in the world, at the moment. And I said, funnily, Malcolm, I've got to tell you, they've just asked me to go and tour manage them. So he said, well, you've got to go and do it, haven't you, really? I said, yeah, I have. So,
How did you feel about the Human League musically?
I hated it.
Really?
If you're listening, I absolutely hated it. I thought it was absolute crap. Unapologetically, no. Never thought it was any good.
Because that is where, to me, I mean, when people draw the line between, and I suppose you kind of can, because, well, yeah, you can really. I think a lot of the sort of new romantic bands, at least visually, were clearly inspired by punk, but ethically, I think obviously it's a very, very, not only sonically but ethically, it's a very, very different thing. But when you look at, I'm sure Simon Le Bon will tell you how much he liked, punk music, but you can't hear it. You can't hear it, can you? Well, I don't know. I think I know John Taylor from the bassist in Duran Duran was in the Neurotic Outsiders with Steve Jones, and I think Duff McKagan was in it. So did like a sort of,
well, fair enough.
So I think I think a lot of those, I watched a documentary on a flight back from Japan. I watched a documentary about Spandau Ballet. And they were saying about how much, the influence of Talking Heads and Blondie had on them. Okay. Again, you can't hear it.
No. Okay.
And certainly with the Human League, even more so, that was becoming the biggest thing in the world.
Well, they were. But I suppose, if you go back with the Human League, they started out as punk. They were on on Fast Product, and the first single is very homebrew. But just when it got to be, I just didn't think it was. I didn't really like the first stuff. Actually, it was all right. It's better than the hit stuff. Yeah. But it became. I thought what I didn't like about the Human League is I didn't think the show was to play for several thousand people. I didn't think it was good enough.
Right.
I thought they're not good enough. The show's not good enough. It's a bit mean. There's not enough lights. The sound system's not big enough. Because I wasn't in charge. I came into it at the beginning of almost at the end of the UK tour at Bingley Hall, Stafford. It was a horrible shed of a place in the middle of England. It holds about 8,000 people, and there was a lot of resistance, to wanting to have the band wanted to have the same production because they weren't into having been, they set it and that's what they took around the world.
Right.
And I just thought, well, it's a bit kind of, not really great. And we had a lot of fun. I mean, I had loads of fun doing the Human League because it was so funny that their self-destruction and I'd never been in with a band where that machine in America, the record company machine, like we're getting you and you're going to be number one. It's going to happen because we paid for it. That was completely like it. And the Human League would do things like they'd walk off telly shows, and it was the record company. We bought you a fucking number one record, and you just walked off, and it's like, well. That's what we do. And Philip Oakey would go on tour all around the world, and he'd say, "I've got," he'd always have £1,000 in his trouser pocket in case me and Joanne want to go home. And I go, "But Phil, if you wanted to go home, you'd ask me to book you a flight." But he said, no. He said, "You know where you are with cash." And the other thing was, so it was ludicrous. I mean, it was, and they would do stuff like. Their behaviour was not. I mean, it was not intentionally diva-ish, but the actual result was incredibly diva-ish. That they would never have. They would wear different clothes every night on stage. So, and they wouldn't have a wardrobe person, so they do their own wardrobe.
Right.
And they took around the world, but they had Philip and the two girls had these three enormous wardrobe flight cases that they took around the world with, which is fine if they're going with equipment, but they had to have these things go to their hotels. And they were great double ones. And so the logistics of this, getting them on flights, is terrible. I can remember being in San Francisco, and the only thing I could get to take them from the airport to the hotel was a big flatbed Arctic that they used to use to take replacement engines out to jumbo jets and stuff. And I had to hire this thing. God knows how much it cost. And unfortunately, I haven't got a photo of it. But there's seeing these three flight cases strapped to this 45-foot lorry. And there was a black one, a yellow one, and a pink one, strapped with ratchet straps and nothing else on the thing. It was hilarious. And the other thing in Philip's one, as well as the clothes, were a collection of cuddly toys that he picked, like Sylvester, a life-size. What? Well, no, a life-size Sylvester. And it was kind of
why?
I have no idea. And it was like But this is, and the manager, there's me and the manager, Bob Last. Bob Last became, the Rosillo's roadie became Human League's manager.
Yeah.
Going round, and we spent more time dealing with these bloody flight cases than organising their career.
I guess that's the difference between the underground punk scene and the kind of the ethos of punk rock, and then when you get to major label pop, especially in the 80s, which is probably, fair to say the 80s was the most decadent, kind of over the top, sort of garish decades ever.
Oh, I don't know.
I
missed out on it, but yeah, it was, because I think one of the differences, certainly with touring, you weren't on tour to make money. You were on tour to sell records, so no one gave a toss. There were no account. I'm sure there were tours that did make money. Like I'm sure country and western stars and people did go and do it, like in the bean counting way. But certainly on the other end, there was no kind of. It was just like, oh, go and do it. So there's that.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's funny you say it, because I saw a quote from John Bon Jovi, who sold a few records, I believe, and he said the reason why Bon Jovi tickets now are kind of 5 times the price that they should be in relation to actual kind of inflation is that, he said, before, if I came to your town, I'd take a loss on my show and you'd go out and buy my new record, whereas you won't do that now, so you're going to have to pay for the whole thing. And that's, I guess, that's the difference between then and now, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess, and yes, and also that no one's, I don't know who the first person was that said we're going to put prices up for concert tickets. I heard Peter Mensch, being interviewed on some telly program, and him about Metallica, and him saying, "Well, we put the prices up, and no one complained, so we put them up a bit more, and we got and maybe people didn't wake up to that, because no, there was no kind of, obviously you did, as on a tour manager, I did the money every night and tried to, make sure that the promoter wasn't fiddling the band any more than the kind of acceptable amount, and we made sure, that the merchandise tallied up and all that stuff, but. No, it cost. No one was bothering about these bloody flight cases or whatever, and they would go, and everyone, or certainly the band and me, would fly everywhere first class and all that kind of stuff. And we'd stay in the most expensive hotels. Yeah, and they'd hate it.
Of course they would.
They'd ask for economy food on first class flights. Because you get it all at once, you see.
Right. Okay.
You can eat it all. Of
course.
Well,
Great. Well,
I had a good time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it sounds like...
Me and the manager, we had a nice time. Yeah.
It certainly sounds like an experience, I have to say.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was good.
What about some other... So, with the Human League being one of those bands, I mean, looking at the other people you have worked with previously, I did kind of go, Kim Wilde.
Oh, yeah.
Kim Wilde, a full-on pop star.
Yeah,
as pop star as you could get in the 1980s, I would say.
Yeah, she was good.
And what was the show? I mean, again, seems to how was that compared to the Clash or whatever? But do you know what I mean? Like, how were those working on those shows and the audiences at that point?
With Kim, I mean, Kim is really nice, and the show it was just like an arena show for me then. It was like, and she was perfectly nice, and we did the shows, and it was fine, and the production was okay. The sound was shit, because it was at the time when there was a particular sound system around that people claimed would fill an arena, and it wouldn't, which happens periodically in the world of sound, I think. Yeah. And it was okay, so we sacked that off, and it was fine, but it was a bit routine. I can remember being trying to, whined by News of the World reporters to try and get me to sort of spill the beans on Kim and all her, and there was nothing to say. As far as I know, she didn't really do anything. She was kind of, she did her gig, and she was a pleasant girl, and she was, cool. So it was kind of a bit, it's a bit ordinary, really.
Squeaky clean pop star is
pretty
squeaky clean.
As far as I'm aware, married to Halen Pace, or one of them. And
she is, isn't she?
And does God, and so that was kind of, it was kind of a bit routine, really, doing her. And there's quite a few other tours were a bit routine. I mean, after Human League, I went straight from that to do ABC.
I was about to say that you've just transitioned straight into who I was about to ask about. ABC. I imagine that's a similar sort of thing to Human League a bit, I guess. I mean, not really,
for me, the difference was that the show was great. Right, that we'd all spend a lot of time putting together a really good show and try and do justice to Trevor Horn's production of that record, because he's pretty good. And he did an amazing job. And to try and give that, so we had a big set and tons of lights and a big 16-piece band with some very, very good players. And I was like, you'd see that every night and you feel proud and you think, these people are getting, they're getting their money's worth.
I was going to say they are. You listen to the ABC records in comparison to the Human League record, they feel like a band made of real instrumentation as opposed to like a button being pressed or synthesizers and stuff. So
I mean, although the Human League did spend a long time doing,
I'm sure they did. I'm not being disparaging to sort of
day 3
music.
Do we like that bass guitar sound? No, we like the one last week better. Oh, are you sure? No, maybe not. And then it goes on, and then but no, so ABC was kind of good, and it wasn't as much nonsense. We travelled in reasonable comfort and style, but it was more about doing a proper, professional, doing a proper show. Yeah, and it was good, and it was, they had a wardrobe person, and it was cool.
Okay, there's 2 more I was going to ask you about. One of them's New Order.
Yeah,
I love New Order, I have to say.
Yeah,
and I mean, what year did you get to go out with New Order?
Recently.
Oh, that was recent?
Yeah, I do. New Order, we've done gigs with Joy Division as the Mekons back at, because we used to play Manchester a lot.
Okay.
And kind of knew them. And I never I never came across New Order in the 80s. And I kind of obviously liked them, loved their music and loved their thing and all that. And it was because of my company we do visas for bands.
Yep, we'll get into that as well.
New Order are one of our clients, and my partner is used to work for Warner Chappell Music.
Okay,
and New Order are one of her clients at Warner Chappell, and it came up that we were doing New Order American visas, and I just said, and in an email it said, the tour manager's not doing it, so I just said, I'll come and do it if you want, and Rebecca, the manager, said, okay, come and do it, and so I went off and tour managed them around America and Russia, and it's kind of, and it fitted in. It was great, and I thought I had a lovely time. And the band are fantastic. The show is, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I was really impressed. It was really good, and they have a punkness about them that it's not the same. Although it's electronic, it's not the same every night, because Bernard has bad nights, when it really isn't terrible. It's like, ooh,
Yeah, I've seen some live stuff where he's up and down, to be perfectly honest. I was listening to a live album of theirs recently, and I was like, "Ooh!"
Yeah,
but
I mean, a good night is
great band. Definitely a great band. I'm interested to kind of go back a little bit. You saying you knew Joy Division, presumably meaning that you came into contact with Ian Curtis, who is at this point a kind of iconic, legendary figure. But I don't know. I always feel like he. Was Ian? I imagine you didn't get the Ian Curtis that you hear on the Joy Division records as you were just sort of hanging around.
No, we were friends. I think Kevin from our band knew him better because they had a girl that they both knew, and so he was just a bloke in a band. And so I didn't really know him. So there certainly no intimation that he was this tragic, the tragic figure, or quite how important that Joy Division would be. I mean, it was it's easy to say with hindsight, but for us they were another band. They were pretty good. But it's when you listen to the records now you realise just how good they were and how well Martin Hannett did them, and and everything about them. But at the time it was just kind of, I'd like to say, oh yes, I understood, but sorry. no,
that's fair enough. I mean, I'm a massive fan, and I'm a massive fan of New Order as well. But New Order, one of the first bands I think that from the kind of them and the Cure, were kind of the first sort of bands when I was young that I remember being like, this is not just standard typical pop music that I'm getting fed by Top of the Pops, that I actually really enjoy. But anyway, so that's interesting. The other band I was going to talk to you about was Public Image Ltd.
Oh God, okay.
Fire away. Obviously you've worked with Public Image Ltd.
Yeah, I don't like John Lydon.
You don't like John. No. John's an interesting character, to say the least, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a twat. Frankly,
Okay. Is that on a personal or professional level?
Both. The Sex Pistols were great. Public Image have made some good records, and I think the other people in the band became, twattish because of him. They aped, I mean, I know Lou. Obviously, I know Lou now because of Mekons, and he's a lovely bloke.
Yeah.
But in Public Image, he wasn't a lovely bloke.
Okay.
So I didn't enjoy Public. I liked the music, and I liked they started the set with Kashmir, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
And after that,
Okay.
they didn't do Kashmir quite as good as the other people that do it. But,
Well, not many people do.
No.
Only Puff Daddy can really do it.
Yeah,
quite as well.
okay. Yeah. So no, sorry. Public Image. Again, it was. I didn't. It was okay. It was a bit.
What year would that have been that you were?
86, something like that.
Right.
They'd had another. I'd like to have done them in the beginning, but I didn't. And they didn't. They were a bit more chaotic then.
Yeah.
They were having a go at being a proper rock band and doing pretty conventional rock band stuff and touring. And I think that was probably their peak in terms of commercial peak. And I think they've tailed off a wee bit since then.
Yeah, I mean, certainly they have, yeah, for sure.
But, respect for Lydon for what he's done and being the Pistols and everything, but.
What is it about John exactly? Because, I mean, I obviously appreciate, I've never met him before, I don't know him. I have a friend who did an interview with him, and he said he's one of the most sort of genuine, open people that he's spoken to.
Right.
And he's like, I think he's incredibly misunderstood. And I was like, oh, that's interesting to hear, because you rarely hear that.
Right.
I also saw that clip of the recent punk documentary that came out where it's John sat with Henry Rollins and Marky Ramone and Duff McKagan and a couple of other people, and he's just ranting and just coming across very, very, very badly. What is it about? Do you have any idea? Can you give us any kind of clues as to what it is that's part of his genetic makeup that has made him such a divisive character, or like what you're kind of to?
I think he just wants to try and cause, trouble and be. I think he feels that maybe he feels obliged. He's got to be Johnny Rotten all the time. He wakes up in the morning. I've got to be Johnny Rotten now, and I've got to be, got to be rebellious and got to be confrontational. And it's tiring. It's like, oh God, really? Okay.
Yeah. Was there any particular moments where you had a real struggle with him?
I'm trying to think. No, not really. Just on a general, everyday basis. I think I didn't look.
Sounds exhausting.
I didn't look forward to doing. I quite enjoyed the music on stage. I liked it. I think he's a very good front. He's a great front person. He's very good at it, and he can own a stage really well.
So let's talk about kind of what you did or have been doing for, what is it now? Nearly 10 years.
10 years. 10 years.
10 years. Viva La Visa.
Yeah.
I've just gotten a little quote. It says, "We're here to guide you through the minefields of visas, work permits and travel documents." So you work with...
Who said that?
That's on your website.
Oh, is it? Okay. Yeah, it must be true then. Yeah. We are.
So what was the kind of the spark for that? And just what was the inspiration for you kind of going down that particular road?
Well, I used to do it when obviously I was a tour manager, and I kind of, in a very haphazard way, and I hated it. It was always bottom of my list, and the worst thing to do. And I just, I can remember queuing outside the Japanese embassy on a Human League tour while they were all, having a day off, and thinking, this is a bit grotty. And I was at home. I was a housewife, and because my partner had a job, so I got 2 young children, and so for the first 10 years I did the odd gig of sound mixing, but I didn't go on any tours, and just to keep my kind of hand in and keep people. So I still knew people, and a band called Steel Pulse. Do you know Steel Pulse?
I do know.
Yeah, the wonderful Steel Pulse. Their manager phoned me up and said, "Oh, they've got problems because they can't get into Canada, or the Jamaicans can't get into Canada, and can you sort it out?" And I sorted it out for them, and then I did a few shows with Steel Pulse. We did West African stuff, which was great fun. That was good. And then after that, other people came and said, "Oh, can you sort us out then?" And it just grew from there. And it took a couple of years. It was just me on my own, and it was not that busy. And then it just kind of got busier, and I realised there was a need for it, and this word spread, and we hired some more people, and it's grown, and we hired people, and that's what we do. You've
now got some of the biggest artists in the world on your that you work with.
Yeah, it sounds good, but it's not. We're not going out to, Ed Sheeran's not saying, come around and watch the football, but yes, we have, and it's because it's all word of mouth, and people like Ed and Elton John and all those sort of people.
The Rolling Stones,
Stormzy,
Beyonce, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's good, and it's great. It's just, I guess it's a horrible job. No one likes doing it. And if you're kind of, we're only as good as our last mistake, or as bad as our last mistake. If you kind of do it okay, and we try our best, and we've got a good, I've got a good team working with me. They're all wonderful, and they're really dedicated, and we kind of do it.
You might be getting a little bit busier in the next few months with Brexit coming, right?
Well, everyone says that. Everyone thinks we're like those people that dug over the Crimean War battlefields, taking the bones to make into fertiliser and stuff. And we're picking, but it's not true. We're not. We're not a public service, but we're not that bad. No, I don't think we are. And the only good thing about it, and I don't think anything is necessarily going to change that much. And I think. The system, but the UK has always been different to Europe anyway, and I think it'll all even itself out. The good thing is that people are much more aware of visas. Maybe people in the past, because I'm sure loads of bands have been to America without visas in the past. Yeah. Tons of them have, and continue to do so. And I think maybe they're a bit more aware of it now. They think, I better sort it out. And the other thing, I think the big problem is people getting into our country. We've got one of the most racist immigration regimes out there. There's an algorithm in there that discriminates against applicants from Africa. Simple as that. So we get in, Nigerian musicians saying, "No, we're not going to bother because we're going to get refused." Yeah, which is terrible. We're supposed to be a cultural world cultural destination, aren't we?
Yeah, of course.
And it's kind of wrecking it.
It's a shame.
So anyway, we do our best to create a friendly environment.
Have you ever had any sort of artist come to you in has there ever been any, we're in dire straits, we've arrived, or we're on our way, or this tour's about to, have you ever had to kind of troubleshoot something which is about on the brink of collapse?
Every day, because most of we bang on all the time, but the most important thing to do is allow enough time for this to happen, and nobody does, of course they don't. And so we get stuff. Who do we have recently? We had Zara Larsson, we had Scandinavian start,
yes.
And someone else was doing her visa application. They'd gone away, not us, and it was stuck in. They actually had to do MTV Awards, catwalk runway announcing thing, and her passport was stuck in the embassy at Stockholm, and they wouldn't give out. And we managed to get them to we managed to get it out and sort it out and get there. Yeah. We did a couple of years ago. We had Simple Minds had again an awards thing in America, and we got the whole process turned around for them in 5 days. It should take 6 weeks, and we got them in. And we've had, people have lost their passport in the middle of, and all sorts of things of, their visa hasn't come through, and we get there's a special way of getting people into America without a visa that you can go through if you know people at the various border points. So we do, we do that. And people with colourful histories, shall we say?
There's a few of them in the music industry.
And there's ways of getting that, getting them in, and we do, a lot of that. So that's what we try and do, that kind of,
Have you ever not managed to get someone through? And have you ever had anyone furious at you for kind of not managing to do that?
Oh no, never. No. Sometimes there just isn't enough time. Sometimes we do get stuff, and it can't be done. No matter what you do, there just physically isn't enough time. But most we always try.
Of course.
Yeah.
Do you think it's easier or harder to travel? I mean, presumably it's harder to travel these days. You feel like it should be easier, but. I heard a story. So I have spoken to Whitfield Crane previously from the band Ugly Kid Joe from the 90s, if you remember them. Whitfield Crane once got onto did some partying when he was on tour, and Ugly Kid Joe was supporting Ozzy Osbourne. He told me this, and he woke up in a hotel room. The band had gone, everything had gone, the flight had gone, and he turned up to an airport with a laminate with Ozzy Osbourne's face on, and got on a plane to fly across America. Now, I don't think you'd be able to do that these days.
Even if it was Ozzy.
Yeah, even if it was
Ozzy, well, No, you wouldn't. No, because it comes. I think it comes back on the air. If something goes wrong, it comes back on the airline. They let him fly. No, absolutely. That's a really lovely story.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I can believe it would. Yeah, it would help.
Yeah.
We know though that the names that drop in the names is very effective.
Right. Okay.
It does have a great influence, in getting visas, but there's certain things they can't do, and also people that everyone loves, people in authority will love Ozzy, they love artists of a certain, like with Simple Minds. You can imagine the people that work at the American Embassy here, or probably of a certain age, and probably love Simple Minds. And we know we've had people like Ian Gillan going in, and they, and Keith Richards because he has to go get a visa every time, they The
chuck it at him as he walks through the door. Probably.
The path is easy. Is easy for us because there's a lot of love.
Yeah,
and a lot of people in these positions, they're not nasty people. We had one guy at the head of one of the port heads in New York at JFK saying, he said it to someone that was going and had problems. He said, we should be opening our doors to you guys. To artistic people, not making it difficult for them.
Yeah, of course.
Welcoming them with open arms. That was his view.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's a lovely attitude to have.
Yeah.
It's good to hear. Before we kind of let you head off, Andy, best and worst day on the job ever as a tour manager.
Off the job.
Visas, the moment where he was like, doesn't get better than this. I'm working in music, and the day when you're like, oh God, I wish I'd just worked in an office.
The worst. Oh God. Okay, worst probably. Bow Wow Wow. Doing East Coast. We had to go up to Boston. We were going from somewhere down DC or so. I can't remember. Anyway, quite a long way, maybe further down than that. We're going up the I-95, and we had a gig booked in Boston, and it was dodgy, and the promoter hadn't paid a deposit, and I stopped at some services outside of New York, because no phone, obviously no mobile phone, to phone up the agent, phone at Ian Copeland and say, have you got the deposit? He said, no, but it'll be all right. And so I said, if we go to Boston, we have to play, because even if you don't get paid, because what are you going to do? Because the fans don't know that. So we went up to Boston, played the gig, didn't get paid, of course, and then came back to New York to go home. And I said, look, you're going to have to. We haven't got any money. I've got no credit cards, no money. You have to turn your pockets out. And we got tickets, and we'll try and eat and stuff. So that's probably the worst. And it came good,
Yeah.
It came good. And the best, I suppose, was doing the Mekons again, playing at the 100 Club, and thinking when I thought I'd never do this again, and thinking, oh, there's my, it's really good, and people are kind of smiling and thinking it's all right. That's the best. Yeah.
Well, that's what a lovely way to end the podcast. Andy, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Fascinating journey that you've had, and good luck with the company. Obviously, sorting people out post Brexit. I hope it continues to be as easy as you say it's going to be.
We'll see.
Or as straightforward as you currently have it. I don't want you having to obviously work even harder than you probably already do. It's called Viva La Visa. If you're in a band and you're heading off on a Scandinavian tour, then you're the man to give a shout to, right?
Indeed.
Right, lovely. Well, mate, it's been a lovely chat, and we thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Cheers. Well, there you go. Andy Corrigan, ladies and gentlemen, of Viva La Visa. You can find Andy's company online, as it is spelt, Viva La Visa. As I said, if you are in a band and you're thinking about doing a tour around Europe, around South America, around Australasia, then he is the person to go and get hold of to make sure that runs smoothly and you get to the place that you need to get to. But beyond that, what an absolutely fascinating life that man has led. Seen some of the most iconic members of the punk rock scene, playing with Joy Division with his band, obviously fisticuffs maybe with Johnny Rotten, the Human League and the 80s pop synthwave phenomena at its height. And still, I think what's kind of most impressive about all of that is, despite the fact that he transitioned from being on the front of the stage to obviously very much enjoying his job and his life and his career away from the stage, to be able to go back to that first love and actually get up on stage and still perform with Mekons 77 as he still is doing to this day is testament to just how much he loves music and how much he loves being part of this scene. I think that's a really, really lovely story, a really, really lovely sentiment, which I hope has inspired and beguiled all of you. Thank you very much for listening. So we'll be back next week with another fantastic guest. And as I said at the start of the show, at Road Crew Pod, if you want to follow us on Twitter, leave a lovely review if you don't mind. I would very much appreciate that. You can find us on Facebook as well. And we'll be back next week again with somebody else from behind the scenes. A little peek behind the curtain into the music scene. I look forward to that, and I look forward to you joining us. So we will see you then. See you later.